Welcome back, all you awakened savages. And today we're talking about making that lasting change. Because how many times have you promised yourself, I'm going to change, I'm going to commit, only to fall back to the old patterns? Right? You wake up, you're ready to change. Today's the day you're going to start the gym. Today's the day I'm starting to meditate. Today's the day I start my eating clean. Right? Today's the day I show up as a different man. But by lunchtime, you're already dipping back into the old regime, doom scrolling, dopamine hits. By evening time, you're thinking on the way home, should I get that bottle of vodka? Should I pick this up? Should I pick that up? Right? When you get home, you're getting a takeaway instead of a home cooked meal. And by bedtime, you're the same man you were yesterday with the same negative loops going round in your mind. And you tell yourself, this is a discipline problem. Why can't I just stay disciplined? I'm going to try harder tomorrow. But this is the thing. You're not failing because you're weak. You're failing because you're fighting a war you don't even know that you're in. Right? There is a version of you that wants to grow. Right? But there's also a version of you that wants to stay the exact same. Right? And guess which one's winning? It's the one that's had years to dig in and lay its foundations and make itself at home. This isn't about willpower. This is about identity. And until you understand the battlefield inside your own head, you're going to keep losing to yourself. But let's fix that. Right? Because I've been through it. Been there, done it, wore the t-shirt. Right? There's been times in my life where I was desperate to change. Right? And I mean like a full life overhaul. I desperately wanted to be sober. Right? I desperately wanted to be back in the gym every single day, to be present with my family, with my children, with my wife, to just be the best man that I could be. I said all the right things, and guess what? I really meant it. Right? I had friends who were sober and they would tell me about meditation and how powerful it was. But see, every time I sat in silence and attempted to meditate, something inside me would just panic. Right? I couldn't sit still. My leg would be bouncing. My mind would be all over the place. And after a few minutes, I'd just quit. Back to doom scrolling, back to distractions, back to just numbing out. Right? I told myself, you know what? I just need to be more disciplined. But deep down, that wasn't the issue. I didn't trust stillness. Because see, when I was sitting alone with myself, I had to face what I was running from. And that was the man who I'd become. The addict, the liar, the performer, the cheater, right? The tough guy who had built his whole identity on surviving madness and chaos. So even though I thought that I wanted peace, I was wired for war, right? And part of me was terrified that if I let that go, then I would be nothing. And this is the trap that a lot of men fall into, right? We sabotage our own evolution. And it's not because we're weak, but it's because we're still loyal to who we used to be, right? And it wasn't until I went through a whole process of healing, understanding, that I realized it was nothing to do with not being able to sit and meditate. It had everything to do with my identity. And when I understood that, then that's when I could finally shift things. Because as I said, this isn't a discipline problem, right? It's an identity conflict problem. And that conflict creates sabotaging loops that you cannot even see. And this is what's happening, right? You try to meditate, you try to go to the gym, you try to eat clean, you try to show up differently and be the best man that you can be. But the moment you start, your system kicks into resistance. Thoughts get louder, emotions rise, your body's just itching for distraction, right? Why? Because your current self-image, your identity, is fighting for its life. It does not want to die. And psychologically, identity is structured for stability. It doesn't care if it's dysfunctional. It only cares what's familiar. That's why you can hate the behaviors, the patterns, but you will still repeat them day after day, right? It's just like a rubber band. You stretch into a new behavior, but unless you consciously shift the identity underneath it, it's going to snap right back. Because underneath us all, your unconscious mind is saying, wait, I'm not the guy who meditates. I'm the guy who overthinks, right? I'm not someone who thrives. I'm someone who survives, right? Peace isn't safe. Chaos and madness, that's what I know. So even if you try to change, your system just pulls you back into the old role. And it's not because it's working, it's because that's who it thinks that you are. And until that false identity is seen, challenged, and replaced, you're going to keep cycling in resistance. Hey, and this is like most men are trying to meditate from the identity of a guy who can't focus, right? A guy who always fails, a guy who starts but doesn't finish, right? Or the worst one is the one from a broken man trying to fix himself. And this is why it doesn't stick. And this is not about self-help. This is about self-concept, self-image, your identity. And until you change the I am, you will never sustain the I do, right? Because your brain isn't designed to evolve. It's designed for survival. That's it, right? It prioritizes what's known, even if the states that are known are stress, anger, addiction, distraction, failure. This is why change feels like war. Not because you're weak, but because you're rewiring years of neurological conditioning, right? And to understand this, you've got the default mode network, right? This is the part of your brain responsible for worrying, rumination, overthinking, self-comparison, right? It's active when you're thinking about yourself. And when you try to meditate, slow down, or be present, the network just fucking fires up like a wildfire and it starts to fight back. Because what that deems is that stillness threatens the self, right, that you've unconsciously built. And it has these identity loops. So over time, right, your thoughts, your emotions, and your behaviors, they form these neural loops, right? So if your loop is, I start strong, but then I fall off, that's what mine was, right? I tried to change, but sabotage myself, that's what mine was. I'm not someone who can slow down, that's what mine was, right? Sound like a broken record there, but this is things that I all went through, right? Your brain wires that loop as reality, and every repetition reinforces it. So this is not something to do with mindset. This is actually neurological. But the great thing is we have what's called neuroplasticity, right? Your brain can change, right? Not through hacks or effort, but through repetition and resonance. Right, so to rewire this identity loop, you need a strong emotional charge. So this is why you have a deep why, a vision for your life, and this is why I bang on about it, because these are so important. And then you need a new behavioural pattern, even if it's just tiny or small, and a non-negotiable environment. So which is your structure over your willpower, and structure is so important, right? Because your life building process is a structure with 4 parts. No matter what you're creating, right? You've got a desired reality. This is where I want to be. You've got a current reality. This is where I am now. Okay. Then you've got an identity and an action to take. So in order to get from your current reality to your desired reality, there has to be an action step. Okay. Now, what happens is we normally know the action step, but then we have these sabotaging thoughts that come in. You're not good enough. You can't do this. Who do you think you are to go and achieve this? And what happens is we listen to these. But what is important is that you have your vision, you understand where you are compared to your vision, and then you take the next obvious step, regardless of the thoughts, the internal chatter. You just take the next obvious action time and time again. Okay, and this is where flow comes in. Flow isn't a mood, right? It's a neurochemical state, right, of full body alignment. So in flow, the default mode network goes offline, right? Time disappears, right? The inner critic shuts up. You become what you're doing, right? And you'll never access flow if your actions are out of sync with your identity, right? You can't enter a peak state from a low self-concept, right? You must become the man first, then the state follows. And once you start aligning your environment, your identity, and action around the new self, flow stops being a hack and it becomes your default. Right, as I said, your brain is wired for survival, and your identity loops are built on who you used to be. This is why strategy alone don't work. You're trying to change your life with the same identity that built the chaos. Right, so see, in order to break this loop, you don't need more hacks or more apps. You need deeper access. Right, you need access to the part of you that was never broken to begin with. Right, and that's your superconscious. Your superconscious doesn't care about your wounds. Right, it sees right through them. It knows the version of you that who is already whole, right? Already wise, already awake. But here's the trap. Every time you say, I need to fix myself, you reinforce the very identity that's keeping you stuck, right? So the breakthrough is stop trying to become better and start choosing who you actually are. So instead of meditating to calm your mind, you sit down and ask, who would I be if I wasn't trying to fix anything right now? That's the access point. That's the portal, right? Because as Seneca said, we suffer more in imagination than in reality, right? We're not suffering because we can't commit. You're suffering because you believe the voice that says that you can't. Discipline isn't doing more. Discipline is observing more without reacting. When the mind spins out, when resistance kicks up, when the urge to quit hits hard, Just observe it. Don't fight it. Don't feed it. Don't identify it with it. There is strength in stillness, not because it feels easy, but because it reveals the truth underneath all the noise. Right? Like the Shaolin monk said, the mind is like a wild horse. You don't beat it, you learn to ride it. If your mind feels like chaos and madness, it's because you're gripping the reins far too tight. So try to just loosen the hold. Try watching without judging. Try sitting without needing. Your mind is not your enemy. It's just untrained. Your job isn't to silence it, it's to lead it back to the truth. Right? In fact, let me tell you about a story about one of my clients, right? Now, just for the purpose of this video, I'll call him James, okay? Now, James was, he was, at the time he was 47, I think. He'll be about 50 now. On paper, he had an incredible life, right? He had a six-figure job in a construction management. He had two teenage boys. His mortgage was almost paid off. But inside, he was crumbling. He was rotten. And when he came to me, like a lot of men do, is to stay sober, right? But he didn't know who the fuck he was anymore, right? He'd stopped drinking about a year prior. He'd had this terrifying blackout that almost cost him his family, right? And I'd been there, so he knew that. And he had what he would call a spiritual awakening, okay? And he heard this voice telling him that it's time to remember, right? He couldn't explain it, but I could relate to it, even though I didn't know what he was going through. I could relate because I'd had a similar experience, right? He couldn't explain it, right? But see, from that moment, he knew that he was not meant to live the same anymore. But the problem, the issue here was that everything familiar still pulled at him, right? The friend circle, the pub invites, the ego games at work, needing to be the tough guy around his sons, right? He tried to meditate. He tried to download all the apps. He'd bought the books. But every time he sat still, he felt like he was going to explode. His heart would race, right? His jaw would tighten, thoughts would slam into his brain like a fucking tornado, right? It would be things like, you're just wasting your time. This is stupid. Get up and do something. And he thought he was doing it wrong, right? But he wasn't, right? He was just trying to access stillness with the identity built on chaos, right? He wasn't lazy. He was loyal, but he was loyal to the version that he no longer fit. And he was still carrying the identity of the provider, the problem solver, the man who always had shit under control. So he couldn't surrender because surrender to him felt like weakness. And until one day he cracked, right? And it was painful for him because his youngest son had basically called him out. He says, "See, Dad, since you stopped drinking, you're angry all the time." Right? And this destroyed him, right? Because deep down, he wasn't angry. He was just lost, right? He didn't have his old vices to numb out what he was going through, to escape, right? He didn't have his old identity, but he hadn't created a new one yet. So we stopped focusing on fixing his habits and started focusing on who he really wanted to be, right? So we worked on his identity, not behavior. I asked him questions like, what kind of man do you want your sons to remember you as? Right? What energy do you want to bring into the home every single day? Right? If you stopped pretending you were broken, how would you live? And this is where things totally shifted for him, right? He just created a new morning routine, right? It was 10 minutes. I think it was 10 minutes of breathing, 2 minutes of standing still, just grounded. And then he would say, I can't remember the exact sentence, but I think it was something like, I am the father my sons can feel safe around. Something to do with his boys, right? And it wasn't complicated and it wasn't perfect, but it helped him create structure, right? And it restructured him because now he wasn't meditating to fix something. He was aligning with who he already was underneath all the noise. Okay, and this is the crazy thing. See, within weeks, his presence changed. His wife started sitting with him in the mornings, right? His sons didn't have to walk on eggshells anymore. He stopped trying to change and just started being the man that he'd always wanted to be. He stopped chasing flow and just started to live in it. Right? He went from being the man who couldn't sit still to the man whose stillness, kind of rippled through the whole room. Right? And this is the thing. Meditation isn't the goal. Alignment is. Right? I don't meditate to feel calm anymore. I meditate because I refuse to live out of alignment with who I really am. I don't journal because it's the trendy thing to do. I journal because it's a mirror, one that shows me when I'm slipping back into my old masks. Right? And I stop chasing change. Right? I sit in truth every single day and I choose again and again to live as a man that I choose to become. Right? And that's the real shift. It's not about becoming something. It's about remembering who the fuck you are beneath all the survival scripts, the guilt, the old stories. And see the men that I work with, they come to me, right? Because they're chasing six-figure goals or some influencer lifestyle, right? But when they start working with me, they realize that's not what they truly want, right? They anchor in a new identity, one that's built on truth, on presence, on purpose, on power, right? They don't need motivation because they're not trying to escape anymore. They're grounded, they're clear, they're alive, and they're living with purpose. And this is the thing. You might have tried all the tactics, you might have followed some of the routines, but none of it worked, right? Because you have to shift everything underneath, right? And step into who you're becoming. Because once you choose the man that you wish to be with full clarity, your body, your brain, your habits, and your environment will begin to follow. Okay? Because, as I said, right, you're not lazy, you're not inconsistent, and you're definitely not broken. You're just misaligned with who you are underneath all the noise. Right? See the man that you're trying to change? He was addicted to chaos. He needed the noise and stimulation to feel alive. He wore masks to survive. But you're not that man anymore. You're no longer the man who's trying to fix himself, right? Who thinks discipline is punishment, who sabotages himself the moment, things start to feel good. Right? You're the man who can sit in that silence because you know power lies there. You are choosing aligned actions because it reflects who you are. And you operate from vision, not from validation. Okay, this is when you let go of reacting and you start creating. And that shift from changing your habits to choosing your identity, that's what turns a struggling man into an awakened savage. Right? As I said, you don't need another tactic, you don't need another routine, you don't need another reset. You need a new identity, one built on awareness, alignment, and will. Right? You need a structure that serves your soul, not ego, not survival. Okay, because when your identity shifts, the reality has no choice but to follow. Okay, so let's let's look at some tools that you can use, right? Ones that align your identity, your environment, and your actions. Okay, so flow becomes automatic, right? So the first one is just an identity rewrite, right? Your nervous system responds to identity, not goals, right? So you must speak from the man you're becoming, not the one you're trying to escape. So every morning, write down one sentence. I am the man XYZ becomes because I choose to XYZ. So for example, I am the man who finishes what he starts because I choose to lead my family in truth. Or I am the man who sits in silence because I choose clarity over chaos. Say it, write it, feel it, anchor it in before you do anything. Okay, number two, this is the pattern breaker, the presence interruption. Most men sabotage in micro moments, right? When the old self hijacks the wheel, right? You must interrupt that loop in real time, right? So when distraction hits, just say out loud, this is not who I am anymore, right? Then just breathe, place one hand on your chest, one on your gut, and just reclaim, right? It sounds simple, but this is true warrior training. Okay, number three, a flow ritual, right? Flow follows focus, and focus follows structure, right? So you need a daily ritual that signals to your nervous system that, hey, I'm back in control. So before you touch phones or anything every morning, right, create a 10-minute ritual. It'll be 3 minutes of movement, push-ups, squats, breath work. 3 minutes of just presence, eyes closed, just totally feeling it in your body. 3 minutes of your vision, right? Who are you becoming? Just visualize that. Visualize the man you're becoming. And then for the last minute, just a declaration. This is who I am. Okay, this will ground you in your power and not reactivity. And you'll go into your day with that in mind. And when you have got that in mind, you'll start to act from that. Okay? And then, throughout the day, you'll have the opportunity to have a super conscious alignment check. Right? If your actions are still being chosen by the old self, then you'll just rebuild the same prison with new wallpaper. Right? So see before any major decision, just pause and ask, right? Is this aligned with who I choose to be? Or is this aligned with the man I'm becoming? If the answer is no, then don't do it. Right? Not because it's wrong, but because it's off path, it's not aligned. Right? And then every week, the last one, number five, just a weekly reflector, right? Growth isn't about perfection. It's about conscious feedback. You need to see yourself as a creator, not a failure. So I do mine on a Sunday. Every Sunday, just journal 3 prompts, right? Where did that act from my new identity this week? Where did the old patterns hijack me? Right? What's the one shift I will bring into next week. This isn't about guilt. This is about guidance, right? Course correct like a true leader, right? And let go of the victim. Right? You don't rise by trying harder. You rise by becoming someone different, right? Choose the new identity, align your life around it, and flow will follow. Okay? And as I've keep saying, right, you're not lazy, you're not weak, you're not broken. You've just been living out a version that no longer fits you. So stop trying to force change from an outdated identity, right? It's time to stop performing and start choosing. Who are you and who do you want to become, right? This is when the real work begins. This is where flow begins, right? So just drop a comment, okay, down below. Tell me what part of your life that you struggle the most to commit with. Might be meditation, fitness, discipline, being fully present. Right? Just put it in there, fitness. Okay, send this message to another brother who's still stuck in a loop, thinks he needs more motivation when all he really needs is to realign his identity. Subscribe to the channel, hit the notification bell if you're truly ready to stop chasing, right? And start becoming. This path isn't for everyone, but if you've made it this far, you're already not the man that you used to be. Now choose the one that you came here to be. And as always, I appreciate you from the bottom of my heart. Thank you. I truly love you guys. Have a great day, and I'll catch you on the next one. A video here, and you can subscribe here. Take care. Bye.